College football finally did something right. I know, it's completely shocking. Plus, there's a lot more changes coming to the college football playoff. What do fans need to be ready for?
And then we take a look at the most interesting teams not ranked in our top 25 on this week's edition of the Athlon U podcast.
Welcome to Athlon U. My name is Braden Gall. You can follow me on the internet at Braden Gall.
And I'm Stephen Lassen. You can also follow me on the internet everywhere. And of course, read my work over at athlonsports.com.
Where should the good folks go purchase a magazine about college football in 2025, the year of our Lord, Stephen?
Well, good news. Two opportunities here. The first one is your newsstand, your grocery store, your bookstore, wherever magazines are sold nationwide. We've got you covered. It is on newsstands. But if you don't want to fight the crowds, if you don't like getting out in public, you can go to athlonsports.com, click on magazines at the very top, takes you to our online store. We have 2 SEC covers, 2 Big 12 covers, 2 Big 10 covers, an ACC cover, and a national cover. So if you're an Oregon fan living in Alabama, it's the best way to get that cover that has the Ducks on it.
There you have it. And if you want to watch the show, please swing by the YouTube page, of course, Athlon U and Athlon Sports. You can check them both out and subscribe, thumbs up, notifications turned on. You know the drill. We do appreciate it if you want to see Steven's beautiful face while breaking down the Georgia Tech secondary, as one does.
I think the helmet wall is way more appealing. So,
what's the helmet that you most want that you do not have?
That's a good question.
I know you know the list off the top of your head.
I need like 40 something more. So it'd probably be like a G5 team that I'm having a hard time finding, like a Texas State.
Do you have a Tulane helmet?
I do. But I don't have the angry. I don't have the angry wave.
I want to see the angry wave. Oh, he's got it. This is why you watch on YouTube, folks. That is gorgeous.
So
it's gorgeous. That's a Sean King retro undefeated helmet right there.
That's right.
Or Patrick Ramsey.
That's a good reference. Yeah. Back when they played in the Superdome. Yeah.
How many Tulane quarterbacks can you name? Okay.
We could probably have a game of like name the most random starting quarterback you could for some of these teams.
So we're going to touch on the changes coming to the playoff. And then I think there's another quick conversation to be had about the changes that are expected to be coming that you need to be ready for. We've touched on them before and we've talked about them before, but I think things are crystallizing a little bit more, I think, Stephen, and I think there's one clear reason why all this stuff is going to happen and continue to happen. And then we're going to do, this is our first time we're doing this. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm worked up about this. Instead of just reading off teams from 26 to like 45 or 50, we're going to go back and forth and we're going to draft the most interesting teams that are not ranked in the top 25. We're going to pull those teams out. We're going to talk about them for a little bit. We'll tell you where they're ranked and why, and we'll get into some of the debates around that team and maybe around that team's slot in the standings within the conference. So we'll just go back and forth and kind of draft the most interesting teams that are not ranked in the top 25. And I get Georgia Tech. That's the rule. You can't draft Georgia Tech. So it's like an expansion draft. You can protect one team, Stephen. Who do you want to protect?
Oh, that's a good question. There's so many interesting teams. I would probably protect Nebraska.
Ah, that's a good choice. I like Nebraska.
You took Georgia Tech, which I'm very interested in as well. So I had to take one you were interested in there.
All right. So let's start with like logic and reason winning the day here, which is the playoff committee, the playoff decision makers. All 9 conference commissioners in Notre Dame decided unanimously, which is interesting just based on the vote. There are voting dynamics that are in there that are interesting because it has to be unanimous to change this. And some of these conferences will technically get hurt by this because Boise State and Arizona State both benefited from the non-straight seeding element. But you and I have been – what's so funny is the reaction to all of this. I don't even think we need to explain to people what straight seeding is. It's just like the NCAA basketball tournament because I think if you've listened to this show, you've heard Stephen and I talk about it, I don't know, like a dozen times. But what I think is really interesting, Stephen, is the reaction to all of this. You and I said this was a thing we wanted like the first month of the format, the first show of the format, like 2 years ago. when they finally said, here's the thing, here's the layout, here's the 12 teams and the first four, and you and I looked at each other like, why are they moving champions from 11 to 3 and from 14 to 5? Like, what are we doing? You and I picked that out right away. And so I don't think, obviously we agree with this change. I think straight seeding is the way to go. I don't know how it changes our champion. I don't know if it does, but it certainly rights a small wrong within the playoff structure, and it's a sign and a step for progress and common sense, Stephen.
100% agree with you. So I do think there is the argument that, well, you're incentivizing a conference champion by giving them the opportunity to have a bye week. Like I understand that, but also I think like the opportunity of winning your conference championship is being in the college football playoff. So I think it's really just a no-brainer. I mean, first of all, on the most basic level, try to explain the playoff to somebody last year who wasn't a nerd like me, and try to explain, well, they actually are 14th, but they would actually be the 3 seed because they're a conference champion. It's very confusing. But not only that, just on the most like basic level, when we talked about the top 25 the last couple weeks, I mean, think about if it plays out that Texas is one, and Georgia plays Texas twice this year close and loses, instead of being in the top 4, they drop down to 5 or 6 or so. So I mean, at the most basic level, let's reward the top 4 regardless of what conference they come from. Straight seeding has always made sense from the jump, and I'm glad it's getting done for this season in time for more changes in 2026.
So I agree with this, and I agree with you. So in the interest of trying to be as thoughtful as possible to both sides of this conversation, what is if you had to make the argument? I've hired you as a lobbyist to lobby for the group of 5 to be moved, for like Boise State and Arizona State last year. I want to say they were like what were they, like 9 and 12 maybe, or 9 and 11? I think something like that in the final rankings, and they jumped up to 3 and 4. And so I just am curious, like, does this give the little guy a little bit better chance? Maybe. In our current rankings that we released last week on the show, Kansas State was our Big 12 champion at 13. Boise State is our G5 champion at 25. That means we would have 2 teams jumping from outside of the top 12 into the top 12, and one going from outside of the top 12 to the top 4. So I do think, that's the clear and logical argument for this. What's the argument on the other side, if you had to make it?
If to keep the seeding as it is, I think you could make an argument, kind of like I was hinting at, that if you win your conference, it's extremely valuable. Maybe you're incentivizing more interest in those conference championship games. So people who maybe were an SEC fan were watching Arizona State pound Iowa State with a little bit more interest. The other thing would be, I think it is pretty interesting if you were to change the home sites to where maybe in the quarters we have Boise State hosting Penn State. Like that's like, it's kind of almost like the essence of college football of, going a higher ranked team going on the road to play at a G5 team, and gives them a better chance to advance. So I think that's kind of it, would be just rewarding conference champions even more, incentivizing maybe a home game. I mean, maybe if I was to say, if to compromise the situation, maybe another thing would be you just maybe give, a home game to like if they were not one of the top 4. So in this case, like Arizona State would host a home game. So
What?
Does that make sense?
No.
No. Okay. So if you're not in like the top 4, like Arizona State as a conference champion would get to host a playoff.
That's the argument for doing this. I'm asking for the other.
Yes.
Right, I'm asking for the argument to keep it as it is.
No, that's it. I think it's just that you were just incentivizing conference champions and just saying, okay, well, hey, Arizona State, all these like Boise State, like they get to host a playoff game. Like that would be it for me. I think it's just kind of like, it's a college football thing.
I still don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
If currently you're jumping those champions up to the top 4, they do not get a home game. So again, I don't know what you're talking about. But
I'm talking about a potential compromise. That's what I was getting at. Like, to me, their straight seeding makes sense.
Of course.
The next thing would be, if you want to do some sort of compromise structure, it would be the opportunity that in a situation,
so like the NFL, like the NFL structure, where you move them up a little bit, but not a lot.
Yes,
Is
they
what you're
would just
saying.
host a right, they would just compromise
Okay,
and let
all
him
right.
host a playoff game.
Well,
I'm not saying I
you
would
can.
vouch for
Well,
that, I'm just trying to throw out different scenarios
no, I'm
here.
very easily confused because I
Yeah,
didn't ask you for a third path, and then you gave me a third path, which is also creative, and I appreciate that. No, I think like what it amounts to, if your argument is I want the Boise States and the Arizona States of the world like last year to be further along in the tournament, that isn't that a participation trophy? I understand why, because they don't have
yeah,
the resources, or G5 teams can't. I understand the arguments and the dynamics here, but that's a participation trophy is what you're doing. Then it's the same reason I think that automatic qualifiers for the SEC and for the Big Ten, 4 of them, is also a participation trophy. I think you should be earning your way into your seeding and to the tournament based on merit, not based on geographic alignment that began 100 years ago arbitrarily. It seems silly to me. And so I think if you're anti-AQ, which I am, and I think you are, then I think you have
yeah.
to be pro straight seeding. I think otherwise
Mhm.
those are conflicting ideas, which again, I understand people are complicated. So I'm just trying to see the argument to keep it how it was. And I can hear like the G5 mafia on Twitter, many of whom you and I know closely, like media reporters that are just like G5 shills, which again we need to have. We need those folks. I could just see them being like, "Oh, this screws Boise State, the Mountain West. I can't believe they're getting knocked down to 12 every year, and they're gonna have to play number 1 or number 5 or whatever." And I'm like, I hear you. I understand the merits of that argument. It's just a participation trophy at that point. It's not the merits of a championship. It's not. It's not what we're going for here.
Can can I make the argument that it might actually be easier to win a playoff game if you're doing straight seeding in your Boise State because they would have played Indiana last year in the first round. So the first round games last year would have been Clemson, Notre Dame at Notre Dame, Indiana hosting Boise State, Ohio State hosting Arizona State. That's pretty interesting. And Tennessee, SMU. I think if I was SMU and Boise State, I might feel a little bit better about my chances of winning those games as opposed to playing at Penn State. And then, of course, Boise played Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl.
You're just like the assumption is that everybody got knocked down 2 slots, and so therefore they are 2 slots better than where they should have been, or they're 2 slots worse than where they should have been. Yeah, I get what you're saying there. I could see that. 12 on the road against 5 is a better chance to win than 4 and a bye week. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
I
probably
mean,
not that different, really.
every year is also different. Like it's
Yeah.
hard to, the 5 seed some years could be as close to the 1, and some years like the 5 could be a pretty steep drop off after that top 4.
So nothing has been decided for the following year. This is just for this one year. They're debating a lot of different things about the following playoff structure. I'm curious what you think about the voting and why the Boise State's or the G5 conference commissioners and the let's say the ACC and the Big 12, like they had to give a little bit on this to the Big 10 and the SEC. So I'm curious because it could hurt all of them in theory, not named the Big 10 and the SEC, the other 7 conferences. Why did they vote for this in your mind? What's the kickback on the back end here?
Well, I think there's 2 things. The first one would be that if you are one of those 4 highest rated champions, so this would be Boise State, they incentivized it this year to where you got 4 million for getting to the first round, 4 million to the quarter. So last year, if you didn't play in the first round, you still got 4 million. Looking at Boise State and Arizona State. So that's the incentive is still there. Like they're basically going, if you are one of those highest rated teams financially, they will be rewarded the same way. I think the other thing is kind of a more long-term play, and Greg Sankey kind of shot this down a little bit at the SEC meetings, but I think essentially saying what's best for college football, trying to put a carrot out there to the Big Ten and SEC because they control the future of the playoffs, saying, look, we did this. Here's our olive branch. Now you have to give some as well. So sort of some give and take there. I don't know that it's necessarily going to work, but I guess that's probably their
Uh,
thinking is if they give a little, maybe they get a little later too.
well, that's what I'm asking. What is it that
Yeah.
they're going to get? And I don't see what it's going to be. Like so when you look at the money on all of this and you follow the money on every one of these decisions, and we've laid this out before, so I'll try to do it succinctly here. The SEC is discussing a 9-game conference schedule. What does the money tell you is going to happen? The TV partners and ticket holders and athletic directors want better football, more good football, and so it should go to 9 games. And maybe that also includes some sort of agreement between conferences in the non-conference, a Big Ten SEC type deal that they can go sell to television partners. It means you're probably playing a guaranteed P4, a non-conference opponent. I could see a 10-game conference schedule coming into the conversation in the next few years. What does money tell you about that debate? That there's going to be more conference games, full stop, on the SEC. And they're going to have to adapt to that at some point. When Sankey looks at all of his presidents and he goes, I'm going to make you more money, vote yes, please. Right now, if it expands to 14 teams, ESPN, the television partner, does not have to fork out any more money. They get this for the same cost. They get more football games. So, but if it goes to 16 teams, it clicks in, the contract changes, and they are required to pay more money. So it's going to go to 16. Like, that's it. 14 would be, I assume, like the NFL model, where you'd have one bye and on either half of the bracket, sort of, right?
Two buys, yeah.
Yeah, one bye on either half, like the NFL model. So 14. And then 16 would be 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, just like an NCAA tournament bracket, which is asking a lot of teams to play a lot of football games. Because if you're starting to get into a 16-team playoff, sure, maybe the G5 team is number 16, but they were number, 9 last year? And you're probably getting, you could have Alabama at 16, or Michigan at 16, or Texas A&M at 16, or, meaning a difficult physical football game could still be 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, 3 versus 14, and you're just asking them to do a lot. I think that's going to happen. And then automatic qualifiers, I think it's going to happen now, because the money allows you to do so much more if you just guarantee 4 spots for every conference. You can sell another play-in Saturday, which I hate that I like, because I hate the automatic qualifiers, but I love the play-in Saturday idea, or play-in weekend where it's like a Friday and a Saturday and every conference has play-in games. Like, that would be dramatic and fun, but it's also what makes money. And so if you follow the money on all this, that's where this is all going, I think.
I'm not a fan of the automatic qualifiers, but I am a fan of 9 games conference slate in the SEC to get more good on good and to make sure that the SEC plays all of its rivalries. Yeah, sign me up for that. I am intrigued by the play-in idea. Again, I don't love the automatic qualifiers, but I'm intrigued. It's definitely going to make for some interesting games that Saturday. So to me, it all goes back to one thing, which is the best way they can make more cash in this era of the house settlement, revenue sharing. What way you do it, you expand the playoff, you play a 9-game slate, ESPN pays them more money, you can probably up the price on your season ticket packages. And then there's also that the play-in Saturday and potentially a package of games with the Big Ten. So it all seems like it's lining up there. Everything, once the automatic qualifier piece falls into play, I think everything kind of falls into place from scheduling from there. You asked about the playoff from last year, 1 versus 16. It would have been Oregon versus Clemson if we did straight seeding. Georgia versus South Carolina.
That includes the 5 top conference champions, right? Inside the top 16, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you just did straight 1 through 16 in the last ranking.
That's a physical game that you're asking all these teams to play a bunch more of. It's a whole nother round of games.
I think once some of those teams got left out and people got a taste of the playoff, they were not going to go through this again. So
I agree.
Yeah,
I don't really care 12 versus 14 versus 16. I think it's about the same. It probably doesn't change our champion very often, right? The top 3 or 4 teams are probably still going to be the top 3 or 4 teams at the end of the tournament, whether it's 16 or 12, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. It feels gluttonous. It feels like you went back for an extra serving and you didn't need it,
More college football is always good, but we don't have to get into the old arguments of like, what does it mean for the regular season? Is it watered down? I just think at some point you're just handing out access, and I think that's what a 16-team playoff would be. Don't get me wrong. I will watch every second of it, but still, I would prefer just to keep it as it is.
All right. Anything else on the structure changes you think you want to touch on?
How confident do you feel the SEC is going to 9 games?
Like vote this week or something on it? Not very, but
Yeah.
eventually, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
100% they're going to it. 0% it happens this week.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
It is it is kind of amusing to watch Greg Sankey and read his comments about how he's the person in front of the podium, and really it seems like the Big Ten is driving the "we want the 4 automatic qualifier" bus, and he's kind of been the front man to get out there and
I
explain it. So
This is not something we've touched on. We probably need to, because I think there's a lot of people that are going to rip on the SEC, rightly so, if they get 4 automatic qualifiers. That is not their stance on this. The Big Ten is
right,
the Big Ten, and this is with all due respect to the Big Ten, they have not had 4 playoff worthy teams most seasons. They had to go add 4 teams from the West Coast to try to boost that up, and now they might. Although in our rankings, there's like it's borderline. There might be 3 this year, based on our rankings, which again are wrong all the time. But the Big Ten has been Ohio State with a little bit of Michigan and some Penn State. And then every now and then there's like a good Wisconsin team. And then there's like a good Michigan State team. And there's a good Iowa team. The Big Ten has not had enough national championship contenders, period, in my lifetime each year to be worthy of that. This is why I don't love 16 versus 12. I think 12 is a nice, good number. It keeps some of the mediocre 9-3 teams away from the playoff, if that's what your goal is. I think it's important to note that the Big Ten is the one who wants more participation trophies here than anybody else. They're the ones who want to bake in
yeah.
automatic spots for the 4th place team in the Big Ten, which I would argue most seasons is not worthy of competing for a championship.
Yeah, it definitely is the Big Ten. I think it is, like I said, it is interesting to read Greg Sankey's comments, and I think some of the reporting that they're kind of, they're not quite as convinced that that's where it needs to go. On the subject of the 4 automatic qualifiers for the Big Ten, they definitely have 3 top 10 teams by our rankings, and I know that we're going to be wrong, but I think 4 with the 18 team expansion probably makes sense. And
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make
well,
any sense to give a team 4 spots. It doesn't make any sense.
no,
To give a
no,
conference 4 spots.
I totally agree with you that I'm just saying if you do the math, which they've kind of done over the years, counting expansion, it works out to roughly 3 or 4 most years. So I understand their request for the numbers. I don't agree with them. I'm just saying I understand that the math and the average, that why they're saying 4, 4,
Well,
2, 2, 1.
they want all of the bids. Like they would prefer
Yes.
they would prefer a Big Ten SEC challenge as the tournament, and so they get half of the bid. So like, of course I understand why they want all the spots. I don't agree with it because I don't think they're worthy. I don't think the ACC is always going to have 2 great teams. I don't think the SEC is always going to have 4 national championship contenders, and I don't think the Big 12 is guaranteed 2. I think it is so okay. Now we're here, Stephen. It is completely insane to me to just guarantee that every conference has the same number of worthy teams every year. That is insanity.
Agree.
That's insanity. Oh, well, the Big 12 is going to have 2 this year, but not 3. Maybe what if they do have 4? What if next year they only have 1? The ACC barely had 2 last year. The Big 12 did not. Why are we giving them more? It's insane to me. It's the whole and the fact that it's, to me, it's giving away the whole game by this being a 4-4-2-2-2-1 thing. Like that's giving away the whole game, because it's clear that this is just about power, which we all know. But like, it's just the Big 10 gets 4, but the Big 12 only gets 2. Like that's so stupid. It's so stupid.
I mean, if we have to go to 16, then I would just prefer all like at larges and of course guarantee the spots for the conference champions.
5 guaranteed, 11 at large. Let's go.
Right. I hate the idea of the automatic qualifiers. I mean, again, I love the idea of like a 9-game SEC slate, but I don't love the idea of automatic qualifiers. But this is about, it's about cash and power. And you see what is going on with the 2026 format. The other conferences signed away, basically. It's now in the hands of the Big Ten and SEC. They're supposed to consult, I guess, and, take into consideration what the other conferences want. But all of that was combined with the structural changes and more voting power, all that stuff. So the Big Ten and SEC are flexing their muscles, to put it mildly.
This is like trickle-down economics and how flawed the logic is of trickle-down economics, which has been disproven scientifically in every stop that trickle-down economics does not work. If you have a room full of dogs, Like if you have a room full of 10 dogs, go with me on the analogy here, Steven.
Okay, a room full of 10 dogs actually sounds like a fun place to be. Can you tell me where I can do
No way it does not.
Yes, it
You're in
does.
a room, you have 10 dogs, no humans in there, and you throw in a giant slab of meat. Just a giant slab of meat you throw in there. Does the biggest dog, out of pure benevolence, decide, man, I'm just going to eat like a little bit of this steak, and then I'm going to let all the other dogs eat too? Like, no, the 2 or 3 biggest dogs that can get their jaws on that meat are going to chew it all until it's gone, and then the other 6 or 7 or 8 dogs are not going to get a single bite, because that's how the world works. This is like college football saying to the Big Ten and the SEC, here's $1 billion every year for the playoff, but I need you to be benevolent and give some of that money to other people. Like, of course they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
So then the next thing is take a bite of the playoff, take a bite of the financials, and then, oh, by the way,
yeah.
North Carolina.
Yeah, come on down.
Take a bite. You want to take a bite of the ACC?
Yeah. Now we're biting people. You're right.
Right.
The dogs have turned on us. That's exactly correct. Well done, Steven. I like that. You took the analogy to its logical conclusion.
Yeah,
Animals being put down.
That's where we're going with once we get done with the future here.
They're just, but again, the TV contract's worth about $1 billion a year. And they're just gonna you're just gonna give $1 billion a year to the Big Ten and the SEC, and out of the kindness of their heart, they're gonna be like, "Well, you guys can have a few $100 million. It's fine."
Yeah.
Like, no, you're not gonna do that. You're gonna keep as much of it for yourself as possible, legally possible.
Yeah. Throw in the ACC and Big 12 some like a small bag of like peanuts, complimentary peanuts here for 2 spots. So we take everything.
I hate the automatic qualifiers thing. I hate it so much. Now, here's my follow up to this, and this is more of a philosophical question for us to sort of hold ourselves accountable. You and I were sort of anti-expansion for a very long time. I would say we were probably the last ones I don't want to say last, but let's say near the end of the changing thinking on this, of the expansion of the playoff. I kind of came around to it late in the process. Certainly I saw that it was going to happen, but I came around saying, you know what? If this gives the Indianas and the SMUs and the Boise States of the world an opportunity to play on big stages like this and have very memorable seasons, I'm all for celebrating those teams and giving them a chance. Can you be pro expansion and also frustrated and angry with some of the things that are now happening? Or should we have always seen this coming no matter what? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think any expansion from the BCS to 4 was always going to lead to more, to 12, and then I think inevitably 16. So I think it's fair to be pro expansion, and to be honest with you, I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of expansion. I think it also just seemed, well, it's inevitable, so let's enjoy the season, let's enjoy the games, let's make the most of it. But also, I think you can feel like, okay, expansion can be good for college football. It can celebrate the Indianas, the Boise States. It gives everybody a clear path to the championship. But I also think that you can be tired of the greed and tired of the, biting off more by the power conferences too. So I think that's a totally fair way to feel. I wanted to mention one other thing, because I think this is kind of amusing, this wording that was in the Yahoo Sports story about the Big Ten and SEC control of the playoff. Meaningful consultation and collect input. So
sure thing, buddy.
Well, I mean, I'm sure they will take that consultation to heart there. Yeah.
100%. Well, and I guess I'm torn on, should I have seen some of the more bizarre things that are coming when I decided to switch to go to expansion. And I do think you have to accept the fact that the money driving all these decisions was always there all along, and that expansion was never going to end with just the most perfect situation right away. But I also don't think we saw something like 4 automatic qualifiers for an expanded Big Ten coming. I think it's fair to say, like, no, I kind of wanted expansion for this reason, but now I'm kind of frustrated that this unintended consequence is now a factor. And I think you can separate those out a little bit. I don't think they're directly correlated, because I think the money in the sport and the consolidation of the sport, when you talk about larger forces than just decision making, which is house settlements and lawsuits and labor laws and antitrust laws and all the other things that have happened, I think it's all there's almost like 2 or 3 parallel tracks, and they don't necessarily tie together, but they kind of do. So I don't know. I've seen a lot of people screaming on the internet about, well, you wanted this, and this is what you're going to get. It's like, well, no, I wanted an expanded playoff for the right reasons, and maybe I should have seen automatic qualifiers coming. But like, I didn't ever expect a 4-4, 2-2, 2-1-3 model or whatever the garbage that is. Like, I didn't expect that. So
If you could go back in time and when the 14 playoff hit, if you would have told me it would expand to 16 teams, I would have probably just said it's either all at larges or it includes like a number for conference champions. I don't know that I ever would have dreamed in a very high percentage about the automatic
right.
qualifiers being this scale.
It's like
So
it's
yeah,
like ultra greedy.
yeah, I mean, you knew it was going to expand. Like it is, and there were always going to be unintended consequences. But to say that we felt confident there were going to be automatic qualifiers at the level of
Yeah.
this, no, I don't think so.
Well, and like the NFL, the NFL was, when did they go to 16 games? Like in the 80s? Is that right?
That's
Like, I feel like excuse me. Whoa. I feel like my entire adult life, the NFL has been at 16 games and 6 playoff teams. But that changed, I want to say, like, I would say mid 80s. When did the wild card kick in as well?
So 1978
Yeah, there you go.
was when they went to 16. And of course, 2021 was 17.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. It took 40 years for the NFL to expand the regular season by one game. And when did the wild card get implemented in the playoff? Like in the early 90s, late 80s, maybe.
Yeah, I'm searching here. It's
My point is that it took.
yeah.
My point is the NFL has a very strict, hardcore governing model where they have a front office and 32, team owners that have input to what the front office decides. And what folks want with college football is something akin to that allows for governance, revenue sharing, scheduling, for everything to be consistent across the conferences, which again takes away from sort of the charm of like 80s, 90s college football. But like, that's where we are. And it does take a lot longer for things to get done when you are trying to consider the whole, right? When Roger Goodell and the NFL try to make changes, it takes a lot of effort. Like, look at the tush push. It takes more effort for something to get passed and changed to go to a 17 game model, because you have to consider player association implications. It's not just how can we grab as much money in our fists and our palms as possible at all times. And that's where we're still in that phase, because it's still so segmented between the SEC and the Big Ten. I think that a centralized governing office and commissioner probably would stop some of this stuff, but the NFL's changes in playoff format and regular season schedule have taken a long time to change, like over a generation.
Yeah, it looks like the 1975 may have been the first wild card in the NFL.
There were 12 playoff teams,
and in 78,
75?
an additional wild card was added to the playoff. So it could. I mean, on the subject of, you mentioned like Goodell, I think a commissioner in college football, yeah, that sounds great, but good luck giving up, asking all these conferences to give up power.
Well, but 7 of them have already, so we're only down to like 1. All you got to do is take the 2 and turn it into a 1, right?
Do you think the Big Ten and SEC are going to give up power? Like,
no, but they'll be forced to. They'll be forced to, because it will be fine. Eventually, it will be in their best interest to join forces, right?
Yeah, like some sort of super league setup. Yeah, I'll see that. Yeah.
Yeah, the question is it going to be like 33, 35 teams, or is it going to be like 45 teams? Like, I don't know. I hope it's more.
But yeah, I just hope it's all 136 and maybe 137 if Sacramento State moves up soon.
Steven, don't be naive. You know that 70 of those teams play a different sport financially than the top 50. You know that.
I know. I enjoy it. I enjoy them all equally, just like our beloved Tulane Green Wave here.
That is how you wrap it up, my guy. All right, let's dive into the teams that are not rated in the top 25. And we're just going to go back and forth here. And I'm going to talk about number 34, the USC Trojans. I want to ask you so this is about a middle of the pack Big Ten team, right? Just above the halfway mark inside the Big Ten rankings. But still, 34 is a team that's got a chance to get into the top 25, a team that could be pretty good, a team that could get to 8 or 9 wins if everything goes its way. I want you to tell me best case scenario for USC.
Best case scenario.
Like paint me the story that happens to get to that best case scenario.
I think, first of all, I think if you're Lincoln Riley, you have to hope that Jaden Maivia takes a big step forward. A quarterback offense operates kind of at the level we can see a Lincoln Riley offense taken off. And then defensively, they continue to make strides. And I think the other thing is when you look at last year, a lot of their games were decided by one score. So they weren't that far off from a couple bounces of being, oh, well, there may be a 9-win team. So I think bigger question.
Penn State game, for example, right?
Yeah, lost to Michigan by 3. They lost to Washington by 5. They lost to Notre Dame by 14, but that's not a surprise. But I guess what I would say is there's some things on the margins. Can USC's quarterback, and also I think like line of scrimmage is still an ongoing concern for USC. Like those pieces, if they come together, we might be too low on USC at 34.
What I find interesting is we talked about Auburn's variance a little bit, where like the best version of Auburn could be really good and the worst version of Auburn could be really bad. I think that's what we're going to get this year at USC also, very large range of variance. And is there how many coaches are under more pressure than Lincoln Riley?
Mike Norvell, certainly. Venables, Freeze, Napier. I mean,
I don't think Freeze and Napier are under as much pressure as Lincoln Riley.
I think given the off-field additions for USC and what they've been able to do in recruiting, I think he probably has – he's not on the hot seat. I think it's one of those things, okay, the temperature's starting to get a little bit warm here, but if you have a 6-7 season, then yeah, I could see 2026 being make or break. I'm gonna stay in the Big Ten. I want to talk about Nebraska. I think it's a team that you and I have talked about a lot this offseason and how much we like the upside potential for Nebraska here. 7-6, 3-6 in Big Ten play last season. I think my biggest reason for optimism here for Nebraska is sort of like baby steps. They continue to have problems winning close games, but they got last year to 7. Then you now have the quarterback in Dylan Raiola working with Dana Holgerson in a full offseason. So I'm optimistic that this offense is going to take a step forward. Also, Matt Rule's teams in the third year at Temple and Baylor took off. Not saying they're going to do the same thing here, but if you look 6-6 at Temple in his second season to 10-4 the next year, 7-6 at Baylor in his second season, to 11-3 in the following year, his third season. So I think there is a real chance that this program takes a step forward. Like they've shown it on the field. They have a difference maker, a potentially one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. I think there's a lot to like about this Nebraska team. They don't play Oregon and they don't play Ohio State in the regular season too. So they missed 2 of the better teams in the conference.
There's a good scheduling nugget there. Iowa at number 27 is the 7th rated team in the Big Ten. Nebraska comes in at number 28, and they are number 8. And then USC at 34 is number 9 in the conference. I really want to stay in the Big Ten, actually. So I'm going to go Wisconsin at number 44. I want to know what this program's identity is moving forward. I want to know what they are. What do they believe in? Who are they? I want to know, like, what is their core philosophy going to be? Because it feels like Luke Fickell figured that out at Cincinnati. He figured out what he was and what he wanted to be, and it worked very well at Cincinnati. And it's like he went to Wisconsin and he was like, it's like he got into the kitchen and just started throwing a bunch of ingredients into the pot, and that none of them really take. Even though I do love cooking like that. Just I don't measure anything, I'm like a little bit of this, like a handful of that, like a scoop of this, like let's add some of that to that too, and let's see how it works together. What would you call Wisconsin's identity this season?
That is a good question, because it feels like they are trying to get back to Wisconsin football to some extent. They hired Jeff Grimes as the offensive coordinator. He was at Kansas. Little bit of an up and down tenure there, but I think at his philosophy, the roots of what he wants to do is probably to get back a little bit more to running the ball And I think, I mean, you look at some of the things, I mean, they have a pretty good base of personnel returning. So I think this is kind of a return to what Wisconsin does well. There are questions within that. And then, of course, Wisconsin still has to navigate a very difficult schedule. So I think Fickle might be steering the program back on track. We'll see if the other things derail Wisconsin from a winning season this year. I am going to talk now about Utah, one of our favorite teams this offseason, Braden. The Big 12, we have talked about it many, many times this offseason, how crazy it is. I am
Where are
fascinated
they
to
ranked?
see
Tell everybody what you have to tell people on a rankings podcast where teams are ranked.
33rd nationally for Utah. They were very much in consideration to be a top 25 team like some of the other Big 12 teams. We have them projected to finish 7th in the Big 12. So, again, not that much separation at the top of the Big 12. Fascinated because it felt like a lot went wrong for Utah last year with Cam Rising getting hurt, shuffling quarterbacks in and out. They have a new offensive coordinator, Jason Beck. They brought in Dampier, the transfer from New Mexico, to start at quarterback. They should be significantly better on that side of the ball. I think we trust Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley to put together a pretty good defense. So I like Utah to rebound this year. I think they can be a potentially a conference title contender. They host Texas Tech and Arizona State and Kansas State. They have to play at BYU, but that is pretty favorable for the Utes.
I'm fascinated by Utah as well. I think it's a really interesting team. I think identity plays a big role in the Big 12. And it's almost like if Kyle Whittingham had gotten Utah into this version of the Big 12 like 8 years ago, they could be the team that like dominated the league because they just have such a stable identity and so good on defense and a more unique recruiting base than almost everybody else in the Big 12. I'm going to stay in the Big 12. I'm going to go number 50 in the country, just nice and round number there. The Colorado Buffaloes. I don't know enough about the depth chart on this team to say whether or not they're a 7 or 8 win team or to say they're going back to 3 and 4 wins because I just don't think we know enough yet. But they have, I'm curious about the attention because there's still going to be a lot of attention on Deion. But is a lot of it removed because they had 2 Heisman Trophy caliber players? Is a lot of it removed because they're not winning as many games? I'm curious the quality versus the attention dynamic for the Colorado Buffaloes this season.
I think Colorado is kind of stabilized as a bowl team this year. I like what Deion did in the portal again this offseason. I do think, just at the most basic level, they were 9-4 last year with 2 of the Big 12's best players, and now they have to replace them, and including somebody like a once in a, 20-year player in Travis Hunter, who was just so awesome on both sides of the ball. So I do think there will be a transition period. And of course, you still look at this team like offensive line, defense has still got to get a lot better. Caden Salter, the Liberty transfer, former Tennessee quarterback, could be a pretty dynamic player in this offense. So given that the Big 12 is so crazy, I don't think they're going to take a massive step back, but it does feel like the margins, I mean, they beat Baylor on a Hail Mary last year and some other crazy stuff
Where the
season.
2 players who made the play were like, they're not there anymore.
Yeah, right. It amidst a crazy season in the Big 12, that was one of the many highlights. It feels like a step back is in store, but they should still be pretty solid. So
Okay.
I hate to stay in the Big 12, but I'm going to do it again. I'm going to stay in the state of Utah, and I want to talk about BYU. We've got them number 30, so they are just a few spots ahead of Utah. BYU projected to finish 6th. I hate to
Got some news you got to cover here.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a lot to cover here. So I don't like to necessarily look at other people's top 25s or putting together the magazine, but I had one of those moments where I was like, man, am I missing something? Like everybody's got them in the top 20.
When ESPN had them at number 10.
Yeah, I was like, that seems pretty rich for me in terms of rankings. So a lot of this is like, it's hard to win close games in the Big 12. A lot of losses on the offensive and defensive lines and, some other questions in there. So I could see some close game regression. But putting that aside, Jake Retzloff, his future at BYU might be a little bit up in the air. He is being civilly accused of sexual assault. So we'll see where that goes. But in a football sense, that is a very, very big question now hanging over this team, a team that I thought was even due for some regression with potentially having their starting quarterback.
Yeah, I noticed the variance also on BYU. Just the number of the varying degrees of prognostication on BYU was really vast. Illinois is another one that I thought was really interesting. We talked about them last week on the show, but Illinois I've seen in the top 10 and I've seen, down to 25. But nothing like BYU, like where we go 30th in the nation and they were listed in the top 12 by a few different places. BYU's variance is fascinating, and a lot of it is going to be tied to what happens with the quarterback. That's not exactly a university like Notre Dame, for example, not exactly a university that generally just allows you to do whatever you want, whether there's a criminal charge or not, so we'll see what happens there. All right, I'm going to go 38, Washington Huskies. You are extremely bullish on the quarterback. I am very interested in this coaching staff because I learned my lesson the first time at Arizona when we badmouthed Jed Fish, and then he did miraculous things that no one can replicate apparently in Tucson. and now he's got a quarterback coming back who's very talented in the bowl game last year. Like I'm curious, make the case why this is a bounce back season for Washington.
I think it starts with quarterback play. I think Damon Williams could be pretty special for Washington. Also, underrated running back coming back to in Jonah Coleman. So I think there's a chance of, we saw what Jed Fish did at Arizona. I think they kind of met expectations last year just by getting to a bowl game, given all of the personnel turnover. And so now you could see, okay, year 2, the foundation is in good place. They've got Williams coming back at quarterback. I think bringing in Brian Walters as defensive coordinator, the former Purdue head coach, is as Belichick did fine. I think Walters could be really good as defensive coordinator there. So I think it's kind of a play on sort of like program growth here, plus a potential real difference maker at quarterback. Also, they host both Ohio State and Oregon. So if you're looking for good upset chances, it seems like Washington would be a good candidate for that.
Yeah.
You agree?
I do, and I think they're going to be much better. I don't know how much better. I think 38 is probably about right, because if you go any higher, you're staking a claim that they're going to be much better, but any lower, and you're kind of saying no growth at all. So I think we've got them ranked properly, but I wouldn't be surprised if they, to your point, pull some upsets.
Yeah, I'm going to go over to the ACC, and I want to talk about Florida State. We've got them 45th overall and 7th in the ACC. I think arguably just one of the most interesting teams, given that, what happened last year, 2-10, coming off of the near playoff appearance. Mike Norvell squarely on the hot seat. They hired Gus Malzahn as offensive coordinator. You also have a ton of interesting transfers, like Thomas Castellanos, the quarterback. He's been at BC. He was at UCF before. I think he's a pretty good fit for this offense, but what's the upside for Florida State? Is it just getting back to a bowl game? Are all these changes capable of getting Florida State back in the top 25? So a lot of intrigue for me at Florida State, just given the massive coaching changes, personnel turnover, scheme tweaks, and just kind of where they've been the last couple of years. Needless to say, it is a very important year for Mike Norvell.
I think they're significantly better than last year.
I agree.
Is that good enough for Florida State fans? Probably not.
I think 6-7 wins seems about right.
That's not good enough for Florida State fans. In a normal season is what I'm saying.
It's not good enough, but I also think that's probably enough for Mike Norvell to avoid being fired.
How do you evaluate Mike Norvell total on the total there?
I think he's done I think he's done a good job, but it's hard to say that given last year. The program was in rough shape when he took it over. They won the ACC. They nearly made the playoff. All that's good, but the regression and maybe relying too much on transfers and not winning enough high school battles and recruiting, probably the frustration there is stacking up.
I'm going to stay in the ACC, and I want to talk about number 55, Virginia Tech, but I want to use them in a larger scale conversation, you have Florida State at 45, as you mentioned. What is that, seventh you said in the ACC? Is that right?
Yes.
If you go down just a couple slots, between 52 and 57 is 5 ACC teams. And Virginia Tech is squarely in the middle of those 5. You got North Carolina at 52, NC State at 54. Then you have Boston College at 56, Syracuse at 57, with Virginia Tech being the middle of the pack, median representative of these 5 teams, directly in the same spot in the national rankings. How did you differentiate between these teams?
Good luck, right? I mean, all these teams are about the same. I think I'll kind of touch on the middle of the ACC. I think there's a chance that Virginia Tech bounces back to some extent. I mean, Kyron Jones was banged up last year. They were pretty heavy into the transfer portal, and they have to replace their entire offensive line. So I could see a little bit of a bounce back there year. We have NC State picked one spot ahead of Virginia Tech, and that's largely because I think the game this year is at NC State. So kind of thinking about like tiebreakers, and you're trying to sort out these teams. So I think, like I said, could be a bit of a bounce back for Virginia Tech. NC State's been pretty consistent. I like CJ Bailey, the young quarterback at NC State. And then, wild cards in here. Who knows about North Carolina? A lot of question marks at Syracuse, given losing Kyle McCord and some of the other losses against a very difficult schedule this year.
So you're just banking on Bill Belichick's youthful exuberance to get them to the top of that list, is what you're saying.
A lot of with North Carolina was actually more of a schedule play.
Yeah, you talked about that a lot.
I mean, they play Clemson, but at NC State, at Syracuse, those are tough. I mean, Duke, Wake Forest, Stanford, Syracuse, Virginia, Cal, Clemson is their ACC games.
Yeah.
That's pretty favorable. So that's kind of why North Carolina ended up being the highest ranked of that crazy cluster of ACC teams. I'm going to take a step outside the power conferences.
Yes.
I'm going to go to number 60. Talk about UNLV.
Oh.
They're the number 2 team for us in the Mountain West. Just a ton of intrigue for me in the Mountain West behind Boise State, because Fresno State's got a new coach. I think they could be a little bit better. Colorado State took a step forward. Air Force is always pretty solid too, but they have a quarterback question mark. UNLV has made the Mountain West Championship game 2 years in a row. Now they have Dan Mullen taking over. They have 2 returning starters off last year's team, and they brought in a handful of power conference transfers. So we think they are the biggest threat to Boise State at number 60, but just the intrigue of hiring Dan Mullen and all of the new pieces make UNLV a very interesting team to watch.
Quickly, how many former SEC head football coaches have coached at UNLV in the last 2 seasons?
Just 2, right?
Keep going.
Odom and Mullen.
Bobby Petrino for about a month.
Oh, yeah, right, as coordinator, right.
And who is the current defensive coordinator for Dan Mullen?
Oh, Zach Arnett, but he left. So,
four different former SEC head football coaches have coached at UNLV in the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, Paul Gunther, who's bounced around the NFL, is now the defensive coordinator there. Right. So it's just a random collection of people that coached at UNLV.
Vegas, baby. What happens in Vegas leaves Vegas real fast for another job.
I mean, I've been curious, why Arnett left. It was termed personal reasons. So in that case, I guess what happened in Vegas is staying there.
Yeah, sure thing. All right, I'm going to go 29, number 29, the Baylor Bears. You know me, I've been talking about this team. I'm trying to avoid the teams I've been talking a lot about all offseason, like Georgia Tech and Baylor and Auburn. I'm really interested in these teams. So Baylor's just fascinating. And Auburn as a package deal, because Baylor 29, Auburn 31. So not only are they right next to each other in the national rankings, but they, of course, will play in a true road game for Auburn in week number 1 in Waco at McLean. It's going to be a great game. Defensive line, I think Dave Aranda's doing a good job sort of rebuilding and establishing the brand and the identity on that side of the ball, which is his baby. They found the quarterback in Sawyer Robertson. Every game is winnable in the Big 12. I'm really interested because he was on the hot seat coming into last season, and then he was like, they lost some games they shouldn't have, and there was questions, and then now that everybody's bought back in again. And so I'm really interested in sort of the trajectory of this program. If they have a good season, there's going to be a very different conversation around Baylor next offseason than there was going into this offseason.
I think they should have a good season. I mean, like, yeah, they open up with Auburn, but they host Arizona State, Kansas State, and Utah this year. They have to play at TCU. That's a pretty favorable stretch for a team that finished last year by winning, what was it, 6 out of their last 7 games, and the only loss was to LSU in the bowl game. I really like Sawyer Robertson. I think he might be underrated on a national level. And also Bryson Washington, one of the top running backs in the country. So they have completely flipped from middle of last season to now. They went from being, well, they might have a new coach, to now being a Big 12 title contender, sort of not all the way like Florida, but Florida's midseason turnaround and Baylor's midseason turnaround are kind of, may have saved some coaches' jobs last year. So
Just a total side note, I talked to somebody last week around the program, says DJ Lagway fully healthy. That's not reporting that. I'm not reporting that, but that was the sentiment around the program was, oh no, he's fully healthy. He's ready to go.
That is a very, very good sign. If that, assuming that holds up this offseason for Florida.
I think
because
it's like, you know how the way I read that or heard it was like, oh, he's healthy today. What happens in the first week of camp when either he throws a football too hard or works out too hard and all of a sudden he's injured again? To me, it didn't mean anything for the long term of the season. It just meant that, like, okay, he's as good as he can be right now today. And that might be the best they can do right now. So just want to point that out.
Interesting intel there. I'm actually going to stay in the SEC, and I want to talk about number 46, Kentucky.
Ooh.
They are picked
Why?
15th by us in the SEC. I'm fascinated by the dynamics here because Mark Stoops is the winningest coach in Kentucky history. They were one play away last season from being winless in SEC play. And I'm thinking about the crazy upset against Ole Miss. They've brought in so many transfers that are junior seniors. They're guys who have played a lot. They've chosen productivity like over, maybe potential or talent that could bank off. It feels like a important year, but it also, knowing some of the dynamics, is like, is Mark Stoops, they really going to pay that buyout
No,
if things
they're not.
don't go well this year? Exactly. So I guess I'm interested in what is the upside for this team. It feels like the floor is higher because of all the transfers they brought in, but I'm not a huge fan of their offensive coordinator, Bush Hamden. I think their offense could struggle again, but it's also like, can Kentucky get back to playing like Kentucky football? I mean, their offensive and defensive lines were the strength, usually pretty strong in the trenches. Wasn't the case last year. So some directional questions there, I think, for Kentucky.
Yeah, I think they've lost their identity. Like, it's kind of like Wisconsin. Like,
yeah,
they kind of strayed from their identity, and like as they got off the path further and further, they continued to become less and less of themselves. And now it's like, oh, I got to try to find my way back to the path, and he doesn't know where he's going because he doesn't want to use NIL to recruit players. I'm going to stay in the SEC, and this will be our last one. If you want to know the full list, athlonsports.com, or buy a stinking magazine, you heathens. Number 32, Missouri, is where I'm going to go here. I'm fascinated by this team, and it's a perfect way for me to preview and tease next week's episode when we talk about the anonymous coaches scouting report on the episode next week. And that is that Missouri had a fascinating scouting report, extremely positive on the coaching staff and the infrastructure around the program, which really, Stephen, is kind of like one of the main takeaways from the scouting reports, is that it's no longer about scheme and personnel. It's all about infrastructure and NIL and how culture, and which is interesting to do. It's just different because that's what you can comment on in the springtime. And I was very surprised with how positive everybody was around Missouri. I have been kind of down on this team from they're taking too big of a step back. They've replaced too many people 2 years in a row. And the responses from the scouting report was like, yeah, but they're equipped to handle it. And I was like, oh, that's different. That's new. We know Eli Drinkowitz has done a good job recruiting and sort of elevating Missouri in that area, but not to the point where coaches are just going to be like, yeah, you'll be all right with this transfer quarterback, and you'll be all right replacing this, top 10 draft pick on the offensive line and this another elite level wide receiver. And like, weren't you surprised a little bit by how positive the scouting reports were about Missouri?
Yeah, a little bit. I think just given the schedule and how favorable it is, I think allows Missouri to once again be a surprise team. It's hard to say that given they've won double-digit games, but I think there's a trust factor, and I think you kind of see that in the comments from opposing coaches that, yeah, they're losing this, and this, But I think the foundation in the last couple of years has said Drinkowitz is just going to find the right pieces on whatever side, whether it's replacing Luther Burden, whether it's replacing Johnny Walker, the defensive end. So it just feels like they've reached a point as a program where there's trust built in. And also, I think opposing coaches are kind of trusting that, okay, they've made the right additions. They're going to be fine in any personnel questions they have.
Yeah, I was just surprised by that. So
those two.
They were number 32. They're in an interesting slot this year in the SEC. They're kind of in that middle ground, which there's not a lot of teams in that middle ground in that conference, but their schedule sets up nicely for them. And that will set up our episode next week, where we talk a lot about these anonymous coaching scouting reports from all across the country in college football. You know, it's our favorite thing to do, so can't wait to get into that next week with you, Stephen. Where can the good folks find you, and where should they go to get their hands on one of these handy-dandy Athlon sports magazines?
You can read all my work at athlonsports.com. We've got a bunch of preseason coverage already up there. Follow me on Twitter at AthlonSteven and Stephen L. CFB over on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to get a magazine, like I said, newsstands, grocery stores, bookstores, but I think the best place is athlonsports.com. Click on magazines. It'll take you to our college football magazine.
There you have it. You can get to me on the internet. Just search my name, and you can yell at me there for all my opinions and my takes. It's totally fine. YouTube page, of course, thumbs up, notifications turned on. You know the drill. If you want to watch the show, that is how you can do it. If you are listening on the podcast app of choice, we do appreciate that as well. 5 stars. If you do not give us 5 stars, you are a
hater.
That's right. Thank you for listening, everybody. For Stephen, I'm Braden. We'll talk to you next week. Peace and love.